my agenda to come up.
You're now live.
We are now live, and I'll take down the message. Okay, so this is Senate Finance. This is February 16th. And last week, as we were working our way through the waiting bill, which now has a very long number as a committee bill, we got to the section on the waiting oversight committee, waiting tax rate oversight committee, and it switched several, and we also had some ongoing evaluations in there. And I wanted to give the affected parties a chance to speak up and tell us. So we have the auditor, and I know the tax commissioner will be here with us. I see his name. Just to give us any feedback they have on, we've changed some of this dynamic. We've switched some responsibilities around, at least the proposal does, and I wanted to give them a chance to respond. So Auditor Hoffer, welcome.
Thank
nice
you.
Building
Good
behind
afternoon.
you.
You like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. I had not looked at this bill. I wasn't aware this was coming, but I've had a little bit of time, and I can offer a few comments. And as I'm sure Senator Brock will appreciate, a GAGAS audit in the first instance requires criteria. If you're going to do a performance audit, you have to measure performance against something that's fairly concrete. It's not like miles of pavement for an AOT, but it's got to be something you can get your hands around. There's a great deal of subjectivity and ambiguity in this language, and that's not surprising given the subject matter. So that presents a bit of a problem for us. And furthermore, looking down the road for when you would like this done, I think, unless I misread it, that the complete transition will not be complete until 28. So if that's true, then you're only going to get 1 year in that new regime before you ask for a review by us or someone else. So that's something to keep in mind. Second, it's always helpful to the extent it's possible to establish a baseline. And in this case, if you don't have clear objectives yet, and the committee hasn't been created, arguably they could do this at your request. The legislature, with aid from all the parties that are knowledgeable, I would encourage you to think about establishing those objectives to the extent you can now, and measure them as best you can now, so that you'll have a baseline, so that whomever does this down the road, you can show what the progress was. Otherwise, you miss that opportunity, which I think is really valuable. So those are the main takeaways for me. This would be a tough job for my office without, at least right now, without knowing more about the objectives. And many of them are really quite subjective. You use terms like sufficiency. Okay, well, that's clearly in the eyes of the beholder. Equitable resources. I'm not sure how to define those things. We could give it a shot, but it seems like the committee that you're creating, which is probably a very good thing, will be comprised, I believe, hopefully, with people who know a lot more about this stuff than we do. That doesn't mean we can't learn. That's what we do. There's always a learning curve for audits. But they might be better able to do this. And if, again, even whether they had objective metrics now to measure against later or not, if they did some work on your behalf, we could do what is arguably a better role for us, which is, measure the accuracy and completeness of their work. That's one of the things that we're pretty good at. Having said that, I have no principled objection, except that without better criteria, it would be very tough.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to be gone in 2029 anyway, so it's my successor. So not up to me.
Okay. Committee, Senator Brock.
I agree with Auditor Hoffer, and what we did in the task force in adding this requirement is it became very clear that we had a whole bunch of things that this weighting study was supposed to achieve. Part of it being based upon the work that UVM did to assess how we measure student performance and student outcomes. And that items that are contained in the weighting study are designed to improve those things. The task force certainly did not have time, though, to go into creating the actual criteria and the detail level necessary to do the measurement. The purpose of this provision was to, one, recognize that if we're going to make these kinds of major changes, they ought to actually achieve something that's worthwhile, one, and two, we should have a mechanism to determine whether it did or did not. The third thing was, who's going to make that determination? And frankly, we didn't trust anybody but the auditor's office to be able to do that objectively and independently. So those were the things that we sought to achieve in the overall language from the results of the weighting study. Now comes the work, though, of defining it better so that, as the auditor has described, that the measurement can in fact be taking place. I think also that we ought to be thinking about interim measures of one kind or another. And this committee that's being formed is probably, yes, the right entity to do it. But I don't think we can do this kind of major change and then wait till 2031 or 32 to determine whether or not it made sense. So we need to get a middle ground that provides some objective analysis of whether this is working well beforehand, as well as provide a mechanism to do performance auditing to test whether it works. And that may have to be done in phases rather than in one huge report at the end.
Okay. So we may need to do, and and some of these criteria they really are more in the realm of the Department of Education or working with the superintendents and principals, but they're education based, but they do need to be measurable. And we've also talked about standardized tests may not be the best measure either, especially for some of the things like the poverty weight. So something to think about. Any other questions for the auditor? So we need to have measurable criteria. All right, Senator Hardy.
Thank you. So what you're suggesting is this other entity that is created in the bill, the Education Tax Advisory or Education Fund Advisory Committee, that's really meant to be really financially focused, not educational outcomes focused as much. So I do think that the Agency of Education would be more of an appropriate body to come up with some of the measurements rather than this new committee. But I'm wondering if we can just create sort of a mechanism in the bill for more defining that, because I'm not sure that we have the time to go through and complete all the mechanisms. And I agree with Senator Brock that we wouldn't want to wait until 2032 to do anything with this. So that's what I would hope that we would do, is have something in the bill. So if you have a suggestion, Doug or Mr. Hoffer, that would be helpful.
Doug is fine, thank you. No, that's all sensible. It's possible if you just flagged this section and proceed as you will in committee and with the full Senate and allow the thing to go over. If that's what happens, you could use some of this time if the agency is willing to work with other experts, UVM folks and others, to try to get some of this done before the end of the session. If you can do at least some of that, that would help us get a better sense of whether what they've done will allow us to do what you're asking us to do, or whether it would need further tweaking. But I'm open to suggestion. I just wanted to let you guys know that, and as Senator Brock knows and agrees, at present, it's a little soft, that's all.
Yeah.
And by the way, one other thing I've learned from us doing, I think, 3 jobs in the education space during my tenure, anything that is related to the schools directly, not the agency itself, is very, very difficult to collect good information in a timely manner. It's a big unwieldy system, and the agency will be the first to tell you when you ask them for information that you think is commonplace. They said, that's not our job. You have to go to the schools. Once you do that, this timing becomes an issue, but also which schools? How do you decide on a sample? Or in your case, do you really want to know statewide? In which case, it's a very big job. So just to keep that in mind going forward.
Yes. I think we found that before, in that the state, that the schools, we don't have do we have a common accounting system? Because we didn't, and we couldn't tell what the average cost of anything was when we were trying to evaluate money things. And this is educational progress, and that's going to be more difficult. So,
Well, to talk a little bit about ancient history, I remember during the time that I served as state auditor, which is 15 plus years ago, I was happy to learn that there was a common chart of accounts that was used throughout the education system. The only problem was they used it differently, and what was in one account was not necessarily the same thing that was in another. I hope it's improved a little since then.
I don't think we've gotten a common calendar yet, Senator Hardy.
They're sort of in the process of implementing a common chart of accounts. It's been rather bumpy, to say the least. So you all have probably heard from your school districts about how much they hate it, but it's sort of still in the works. But AOE does collect a lot of data from school districts about student performance and financial stuff. So I do think that there is data available on a school district, and that the original pupil weighting study used data from that the AOE had collected. So I think it exists. It's just a matter of defining it. So we really should be talking to them.
Yeah, I've already got a note for next week. And if I say it out loud, Faith will make sure we do, to get somebody from AOE in to help us at least have something in here. This does have to go through the other body. But if it's going to go this year, it's got to come out of here. So if we have a placeholder of some kind in there, that will allow them to maybe flesh it out a little more, provided they agree with what we've done on everything else, which is not overly likely. But, we need to flag that as something that needs attention, even if we do kick it off onto a committee or onto the Department of Ed to bring us back a proposal, us or probably the Ed Committee next year, and see where that goes. Maybe they can use is it in this bill? We told them to hire 3 or 4 more people. Maybe that's what they can use them for. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Doug, for taking time to be with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Let me know how I can help.
Okay, well, we will be back in touch.
Okay.
All right. Catherine, I see, there you are. Okay, so just looking at the Ed Fund Advisory Committee and some of the tasks we've set, I know Joint Fiscal works to get, with the tax department to get that letter out. Do you see red flags, issues?
I don't. I think a lot of this is some of this is basically current law. The collaboration with the Agency of Education is trying to formalize, I think, what's been informal. I have 2, I guess, areas of concern. One is just talking about the letters. I just noticed it. I think it's due January. The recommendation is January 15th. and which is later than December 1. So for schools that are putting together their budgets, that might be tight timing. That's just
Yeah,
that's not a JFO thing. It's the committee that's setting it, but it's just something for you all to think a little bit about. And I'm not sure why the January 15th date was chosen. But school boards are often closing their budgets around that time. So
yeah,
you
because
might
there's
want
all
to,
kinds of posting. They have to post the budget X number of weeks before an election and it has to be finalized. Okay.
right. So that's just one thing
I'm going
to,
to let Catherine finish and then we'll have questions.
and then the other piece that I am pondering is this collaboration with the agents of education and the recalibrating the weights. It's I don't know how specific it should be, but it's pretty vague in terms of how often they should be recalibrated and if there's a need to use to use the model that was used before. So that's just a point of further discussion and consideration as you all work through this. I'm not quite sure exactly what this will be. And maybe we go to the committee and the committee agrees to it and we come up with a recommendation. But I don't think doing the weights every year is probably a bigger lift. Recalibrating is not what I think was anticipated. So it's sort of figuring out what that process should be. I don't have a problem working with the Agency of Education, and we do that now as well. So that part should be fine.
Okay. So basically, all right, Senator Hardy, I know you had your hand up. Can you share what the thought was on January 15th?
Well, I think, Catherine, the December 1st letter is still December 1st. If you look
Okay.
in section 16, that's the December 1st letter. So
Okay.
that doesn't change. The other stuff is just reporting to the legislature. And I think there's language in here that is, and I have to look, but there's language in here about how the weights would be set a year in advance. So
So that's helpful. Can I just talk about the January 15th
Yeah.
date just for a second? Just so on section 15, no, that's not it. Yes, no, is it 15? Where it talks about the categorical aid and the, it's the top, no, it's section 14 in C. And just, maybe I should go back and read it. I'm just not quite clear because it has the weights and categorical aid as necessary. So I just want to make sure school boards have the information. You're right, the December 1 letter is still there. I don't know if this would change anything for the school board's budgets, and I would just want to think about that. I just noticed that when I got on here, so I
Okay.
haven't, I just haven't thought about that. I wanted to.
We should at
Yeah, and
least
there
be
was-
clear.
well, the intent was, and maybe it didn't make it into this draft because I was trying to remember a lot of details when I worked with Jim on this draft, but the intent was that we would set the weights. The weights would, if the legislature was going to mess with the weights or change the weights, it would be done a year in advance. So it wouldn't be during the session we would make a change to the weights or the categorical aid amounts and then do it for the next school year. It would be in advance. And so if that needs to be clarified, Catherine, I think any of this language that needs to be clarified, we can certainly do that with the dates, but it wasn't the intention that we would wait till January 15th to get them all this information.
Yeah, I didn't think it was. So you're right. So we need to go back and just make sure that what you're talking about, the intention, doing it a year ahead of time is a good idea if you're making changes to the weights. And then just on the complete recalibration of the weights, which I think is not an annual event. This is very broad. So I guess one thing I would like to think about a little bit is how much more direction do you want to provide or not provide on how often that would happen, and if there's anything specific that you would use for it.
Yeah, Professor Colby suggested that the weights need to be, and she made a distinction between recalculation and recalibration. And it's subtle, but actually a big difference. And that the recalibration, I think, has to happen at least every 5 years. And recalculation could happen more frequently if something major changes. And that the model that you would share with AOE would be able to do the recalculation. The recalibration may take a little bit more effort, and we certainly could define that more, but my recollection is that she thought at least every 5 years. And they were just recalculated in the fall. The task force asked her to recalculate them, but they haven't been recalibrated since the study was done. So, and Senator Brock, I don't know if you remember this whole conversation about recalculation versus recalibration, but it was subtle but important.
Okay. I'm thinking of something. January 15th. Unless we're giving this committee the power to calibrate or calculate, whichever it is, rates, any change is going to have to be legislative. And that means if we don't get it, well, I suppose January 15th of the first year, we may have time to get a bill drafted. Provided it's not as controversial as this one. But I think we need to look, we've got school boards and budgets and their timing, but if we're talking about something that's going to need legislation, we're going to have it lined up with our bill drafting and recommendations would have to come to us. Well, I mean, if it's the second year of a biennium, they'd have to come to us easily in November. So somebody could get a bill drafted for consideration. So that might be something to think through while we're working on this. Senator Hardy.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if Catherine, you could just look through all those dates and sort of map them out with your staff and with the AOE staff and see if it all makes sense in terms of, and taking into consideration potential legislation and school district budgeting and all that stuff. The intention was not to create havoc. It was to try to actually decrease the havoc. So.
Yes, I can do that. And I will look for that 1 year. That'd be helpful. I will look for the language on the 1 year ahead of time as well. And speaking to the recalculation and recalibration on section 17, I'm just, the recalibration is a bigger deal. It's really, I think, running through what Professor Colby did on her model. And so that's the part that I would welcome further discussion and on that, because I think that is that's substantially more work, I think, than a recalculation. And so some of that we just need to, it's going to be a question for you all, how much do you want to, and it may be that we even come back with recommendations to the committee and we set up a time, but it's helpful to know if you're going to be doing this every 4 years. And I had heard 5 years also. So that's why I was throwing that out there. So I'd like to just ponder that a little bit more and think about options for it.
And we'd have, if it is going to be the same kind of process we went through now, I'm assuming that we aren't going to have the expertise. So we will have to have a budget to, like the year before, to hire the expertise we need to do the job correctly. Because there's nothing we're going to do that's going to monkey with school funding that's going to be non-controversial. Just doesn't work that way. So, okay, so we've got to do some thinking on the timeline.
We will pull together a timeline on just thinking through all of that as Senator Hardy requested and lay out we'll see what issues arise or where so you all can
Yeah.
also see it more clearly.
Because having this thought out beforehand will increase the probability that it gets done in something less than 25 or 30 years. So, and once we get a smooth system, hopefully it could just be one of those things that goes, gets adjusted and goes into the miscellaneous tax bill, but it's going to take us a while to get there. Okay, other questions for Catherine? Catherine, do you have other questions for us?
No, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. All right. Commissioner Bolio is with us. And Commissioner, again, this makes changes, gives what are we calling the committee? Ed Fund Advisory Committee. They're going to be putting out that December 1st letter. Just your thoughts. Are you going to miss doing that letter if we take it away from you?
That's a loaded question, Madam Chair. Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in on this. I had prepared just a few high-level remarks as well, but I think the earnest discussion that you folks will have is this afternoon with Secretary French. So if it's all right with you, Madam Chair, I might just offer a couple of what I'm calling observations at this point, and then also speak specifically about the Education Fund Advisory Committee. So, a couple of things that I've observed, and forgive me because I suspect many of the committee members have already been thinking about these kind of dynamics as well with this whole discussion. But, one of the things that we've been thinking about is that with the reweighting efforts, it's likely to be expected that overall spending in the system will go up, right, in the tax capacity model, because you'll have districts who gain capacity, and our hope is that they would use it to support their students, but you'll also have districts that lose capacity that won't be able to, likely won't be able to cut costs commensurate to even that out. So that's one observation, and sort of another one that we haven't quantified yet, but is interesting, is that there's a correlation with the towns that are going to lose capacity. A lot of that because of the difference in poverty weights, also happen to be districts with high property values. And so our expectation is also that the cost for property tax credits will likely go up. Again, we haven't quantified that yet, but just sort of an interesting observation that my analysts had noted and seems to track. And certainly for those folks who are under the 47,000 of household income, where their income rate is statutorily set, would definitely see a property tax credit costs go up for that. So, because of those two things, one of the things that we've definitely flagged for further consideration is the suspension of the excess spending threshold. I know previously the discussions had been that we would want to suspend it to ensure that it's not underweighted towns who are getting hit by it. I'm guessing the current thinking now is that you don't want to have towns that have big swings in equalized pupils due to the reweighting become subject to the cap, to the excess spending threshold, just because of the reweighting. So I don't have a solution for that problem. It's a difficult problem to solve, but just noting that, especially with the other cost pressures that we might see. Specifically on the Education Fund Advisory Committee, I struggle a little bit to see the value that we'd get from moving the December 1 letter to it. The work is really already collaborative between JFO, Agency of Education, and my department. And the bill doesn't call for a change in how the calculation is made, right? So the statute is very prescriptive. And really, from my team's perspective, it's a really fairly technical math exercise. My read of the bill was not that any of the public members of the committee would be taking on any of the actual work for that calculation. So to me, it feels like the calculation process would be the same, but then would have to go through this committee. So I didn't quite see what the value is for moving the December 1 letter to to that committee. I'd also note, I suspect maybe there's larger discussions again that you might have with Secretary French and just heard with Catherine as well about, recommendations for reweighting. And so I'm not an expert to weigh in on that area. And maybe there's some value to be derived there, but I didn't immediately see value for the December 1 letter. I'm also not dying on that hill at this point. But those are my preliminary thoughts.
Committee, any questions for Commissioner Bolio? Okay, so yeah, since your department, Education and JFO are doing this letter now, nothing in this bill changes what goes into that letter or the calculation. So your question is, why are we moving it to a committee which does it say how often they meet, Senator Hardy? Or
I think
I
I'm
don't-
charged with, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's
No,
okay.
the
Yeah, you're
how-
charged with calling it. I don't think it says specifically how often it meets.
okay. Okay, but I'm assuming that that would take a budget of some form. So why, I guess it begs the question, why are we calling a committee in to session if this is meant to be so cut and dried that it's not partisan, no one can play with it, it just is. So I think that's on our questions from the commissioner. All right. Any other questions for Commissioner Bolio? I'm not hearing any. Anything else you want us to think about?
Not on this topic, no.
Okay, not on this topic, all right. Okay, well, we have got some time here, so I'm seeing Jim Demaray's name is up. I don't know if he is available to pop up, but we might, there he is. We might take a look at these sections of the bill and just kind of walk through what it says. Can you do that for us? Put it up? Or
Oh, I
tell
haven't.
us-
I can. I'll take a minute though, because I wasn't expecting.
No,
pull
you
up, so
weren't
hold
on
on.
there, and this is just off the cuff.
That's fine. Let me just give me a
But
minute.
this
if I could,
committee
just
got
to,
a long break, and I'm not predisposed to give them another long one. We have a lot of work to get to.
okay, give me 1 second, and I can get this up for you. Yes, okay. Okay. Okay, if I can share the screen, which I can, good. 9-1.
Making progress.
Okay, we're on the wrong screen. Now we're on the right screen.
No, we had a screen, and now we've got your file auto save screen. There it
Nice, hold on.
goes. Okay, we've
Hold
got
on.
something. All right, good.
Yeah, hold on. Let me get this centered. Systems are giving me trouble today. There we go. Okay. All right. So let me make
Well,
that
you
bit.
got to make it smaller again. This one, we're only getting half a sentence.
Yep. How is that?
Hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed?
No, it was a good size and then it got big again.
That's too big for you. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
it's too big.
How's that?
It's the same. We
It's
only
not-
see as far as not even the full word finance.
Okay, so something's happening. I'm not sure what, because it's on my screen just fine. Let me stop the share for a minute and redo it. Just see if that fixes it.
Because it was fine for about a second and then it's flipped back to big.
Is education. Yeah, here it is again.
Success.
Oh, success. Oh,
But it fell
I thought-
down.
I thought you were gonna say, okay, hold on. Here we go. Show that. Success.
Hasn't come up yet. There it is. Yes, I can read it. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming most of the committee can read it. All right.
Okay, so for the record, Jim Damer, that's console. We are looking at your draft 2.12 of your committee bill on pupil weighting. I think you asked me to take a look at the sections on the new committee.
Yes,
So let me find that.
you just have to scroll it down.
Okay, here we go. Okay. All right. So this language actually came over from came over from, I think Abby Shepherd worked on this maybe with you, I'm not sure. So this language got dropped in here. It's a change to the tax title 32. So it's adding a section of law. So this is statutory law, not session law. So this is meant to be permanent. And so it reads that there's created the Education Fund Advisory Committee to monitor Vermont's education financing system, conduct analysis, recalculate and recalibrate the pupil weights and categorical aid amounts as necessary, and make annual recommendations reporting its findings to the General Assembly. And then membership are the Commissioner of Taxes, the Secretary of Education, and 5 members of the public. So 2 with expertise in ed financing, appointed by the Speaker, 2 with the same expertise appointed by the Committee on Committees, and 1 by the Governor. So those 5 people will need to be compensated for their time. And there's no set number of meetings here in this section. So unclear what the appropriation would be exactly. Then C is powers and duties. So annually on before January 15th, the committee shall make recommendations to the General Assembly regarding the, again, same words, recalculation and recalibration of the pupil weights and categorical aid amounts as necessary, property dollar equivalent yield, income dollar equivalent yield, the non-homestead property tax rate, and the amount of the stabilization reserve. Assistance is from various folks. So we've got Department of Taxes, Agency of Education, GFO, that's Consul, and Office of Ledge Operations. The Commissioner of Taxes should call the first meeting. And the committee will select a chair at that meeting. Majority will be a quorum. Compensation is pursuant to 1010 of this title. So I think this is 50 bucks a day per diem plus reimbursement. And that's it for that section. And then you're talking about this section, section 15, which is under the previous section. The first report of this committee will be on or before January 15th of next year, coming to you among other committees. And in that report, it shall recommend the upcoming fiscal year yield, homestead education property tax rate, and the amount of the stabilization reserve. as if it was maintained at 5%. And then you're talking about section 16, which is the recommendation. So it changes the, I guess, the process of it for the December 1st letter. So now it says annually, not later than December 1, the Ed Fund Advisory Committee, after consultation with JFO, shall calculate and recommend a property dollar equivalent yield, etc. And shall assume that annually on before December 1, the Ed Fund Advisory, they assume to relate to the next subsection. So that's the only change in A, and then C is changing to say annually on before December 1, the Education Fund Advisory Committee, again with the assistance of JFO, should prepare and publish the Ed Fund Outlook. And the rest of this language is the same as it was in statute before. And those are the 3 sections I believe you were talking about.
Yeah. And I guess what in this section isn't being done now? What are we adding,
Well,
if anything?
Well, the committee's new, obviously, so that's a
Yeah,
new
but I
thing.
mean, what
Like
we're forming a committee. But I'm struggling with, and I guess it's for Senator Hardy or Senator Brock. We're setting up and we're paying a committee, which means this will go automatically to approps. What value added are we getting in exchange for setting up and paying this committee? What's the problem with the present system that we're trying to address?
Are you asking me?
Well, either one of you. I mean, this was I'm just trying to figure out, I understand we may need a group or somebody to watch the weights and let us know if the weights are getting out of balance. But this is taking a lot of responsibility that's presently being done by the tax, the education, and joint fiscal. And we're putting up a committee to meet annually to do what I think is essentially the same thing. And I'm just wondering what was the thought behind that?
I think there are a couple things. One is that a lot of the work of sort of ongoing oversight of the school finance system, which should be done in collaboration with these 3, isn't well organized and doesn't happen as frequently as it should. And so this would create a mechanism for the oversight, the recalculation of weights and categorical aid grants. So not just the weights, but also other mechanisms of funding in our system. And that there was a sense that there wasn't sort of an ongoing expertise that was providing this sort of focused oversight. And that was one of the reasons that the weights went so long without being looked at, and the AOE does not have the capacity to do that. There was a statutory requirement that the Agency of Education recommend changes in the weights, and you'll see in this bill that statutory requirement is removed, and they were never able to do it. They didn't have the capacity or the data or expertise to do it, and that's why we ended up hiring a consultant. So this was
Right.
really to have the built-in capacity and expertise that would be ongoing. And part of the reason that the December 1 letter was moved to this in this draft is to have it all sort of centralized in one place, where AOE, joint fiscal, and the tax department are all working together more formally, because right now it's fairly informal except for the December 1 letter.
Okay, but we have what, at least 5 members of the public?
There was a sense that having sort of outside expertise from the education community and potentially from the education finance expertise would be helpful. And this originally was a tax commission proposal. That's where this came from, the tax commission, and the task force, looked at the tax commission's proposals and thought that this made sense given the fact that there was not.
Okay, so can I assume that was Deb Brighton's section of the tax proposal?
I believe so, but it was also, I believe, part of previous tax commission proposals as well.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. I just want to make sure. So what we're hoping to do is get expertise by paying them $100 a day. Because we don't have it in-house. All right. Committee, any other questions about this section? Comment?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator McDonald.
I apologize. I was listening and I don't know the role that the December 1st letter plays along with the other discussions, but I would caution us to keep the December 1 letter to say what the tax rate would be under the existing law and not, and the purpose of that letter is to know what it would be if we don't change the law. The December 1 letter was put in there to keep administrations from using ed money that might be in excess or whatever to craft a budget before we ever showed up in the legislature. So I wouldn't mix that in with a study committee that operated during the months of the year before the legislature showed up. So thank you.
Okay. So what was the problem? Perhaps Senator McDonald, you could refresh our memory. What was the problem that was happening before that caused us to put in that December 1st?
Act 60 established the statewide property tax rate at $1.10, I believe.
Yeah.
And at $1.10, the administration, the Secretary of Education, and others they monitored the school boards and what the raises were being, the increases were being made, and they had a pretty good idea of how much $1.10 would provide. And for the first 2 years with, I think it was Governor Dean, Governor Dean's people recognized that $1.10 was going to raise much more money than the school districts were going to spend. And the budget, when we showed up, cut the appropriation from that went to the ed fund to pay for state aid. It just cut it to the bone, and it stayed $1.10. And in the first 2 years, we were using statewide property tax monies to fund the general fund budget, which was contrary to the promises made by those of us that voted for Act 60 to begin with. And when Governor Douglas was elected, he pursued the same practice. And we showed up, and the appropriation was it was supposed to go to the ed fund, was diminished because it was extra. And under your leadership in finance, we crafted that letter, which said, based on what the schools appear to be about to spend, it doesn't take $1.10 to fund the schools. And we reduced that $1.10, I don't know what it was the first year or so, maybe to $1.07, and eventually it got into the 90 cents. and high
Less,
80 cents.
yeah.
And the general fund transfer continued to be applied. And the ratio between the amount of money to pay for the schools raised from local taxes, property and income, and the amount raised from the general fund remained fairly stable. But in the first several years of Act 60, that was the problem that was being solved, that the ed fund was shorted the general fund transfer and the property tax was picking it up. And after that, the letter really only required a sentence or two. This is what the tax rate would be unless you change the law. And that prevented governors from crafting a budget that assumed that used up all that money. Yep. So I'm repeating myself and I will stop. Thank you.
Okay, so that, this was a keeping everybody honest and only setting the tax rate at the level necessary to raise the anticipated amount of revenue. This is after school, either finance officers, superintendents, let the Department of Ed know what they were going to be proposing, right, in their budgets?
Yep, they scouted the budgets and they had a pretty good estimate. And I believe that for most of the years following that change, we were able to lower the tax rate and keep the share of state funding and local taxpayers funding constant. And in the paragraphs began to be 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs where governors began to say what we ought to do, but we were not preempted when we arrived to be sworn in January, and that was very helpful. Yep.
The money hadn't already been spent somewhere else, at least in proposal. All right.
Well said.
Okay, committee thoughts on this?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Bray.
thank you. I just wanted to check in a couple questions. One was, I thought I heard you say that we were hiring an expertise at $100 a day, and I didn't, we only see a little bit of the text here. So I don't know if that is elsewhere or if I missed.
No, it says they would be given a per diem, and I think our standard per diem is, well, for the courts, it's $50. I think we're somewhere under 2, around 100. But there is a standard per diem, which is very low.
Right.
For
Especially know
anyone.
it's still 50.
The courts, well, when I was on jury duty 2 years ago, it was $50 a day. And if you got a parking ticket, that was your lookout.
Well, I think we might still be at the same level.
I think
So-
we are.
Right. And so to the extent that we can hire expertise for that, for a per diem, I don't know how that would work out, like who will get, but
Yeah.
so I'll leave that one alone. The other one I just wondered about was when we create another working group or whatever we call it, a committee, I always wonder to what degree are the people who are being signed up for the committee agree that this will be a useful construct for them in which to do work, as opposed to us thinking it would be a good way to do something, but the people who are being recruited don't necessarily find it a particularly useful way of getting something done. So I don't know how to assess that other than to hear from the operating areas to say, yeah, this would be helpful to us. Sometimes they'll say, yes, this would be good because you'll organize our coming together and the rules of the road will be straight for all of us, et cetera. Other times it's a kind of a make work situation and it's not all that helpful. So I don't know how to distinguish here, but I wanted to raise the question.
And I think we would all agree, especially, going through this year when we've lost our in-house expert on the property tax, that it would be good to have some expertise, not, you know, the question is, to me, there's learning our taxing system also doesn't happen overnight. And so continuity would also be an issue. And I guess the question is, for me, is the highest and best use of the expertise having them do what is designed to be the very straightforward, get out your calculator and add up the numbers and divide? Or would it be better to use that expertise on a less regular basis, but to assess the weighting structure, which is where we started out? So, thoughts there? No thoughts. Okay, we're taking that down. Well, we can go on and just flag that. We are set to have a break. So why don't we, let's see. We got a half-hour break, Faith? I think we do. I lost my agenda again.
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, you've got a 15-minute break, and then we're going to come back. And that one we're going back to the retirement income tax exemptions in the feminine hygiene products bill. So I will see